We powered down our orbital defenses, opened our airspace, and offered our hands. They took them, smiled with their mandibles, and shot us in the back. The Xylari thought destroying our politicians and generals would paralyze us. They didn't realize they had just assassinated the only people holding us back. The silence inside the Geneva orbital spire was not one of tranquility, but of tightly coiled anticipation. For 6 agonizing years, the Orion Arm had been bathed in the blood of human and Xylari forces. It was a grinding, resource-starved war of attrition that humanity was fundamentally losing. We had the grit, but they had 3 centuries of technological head starts in slipspace, field manipulation, and plasma cohesion. The Peace Summit, on April 12, 2184, wasn't just a diplomatic victory for Earth. It was a desperate, gasping lifeline for a species on the brink of economic and military collapse. Secretary of State Eleanor Hastings stood at the head of the obsidian table, her tailored suit crisp, her posture radiating a manufactured confidence. Opposite her stood High Emissary Vex of the Xylari Concordat. Vex was a towering, chitin-plated biped, wrapped in ceremonial silken robes that shimmered with bioluminescent thread. To the uninitiated, the Xylari appeared terrifying. Predatory insects evolved to apex sentience. But for the past 3 weeks, Vex had spoken with the measured, empathetic cadence of a poet, promising co-prosperity, shared borders, and an end to the orbital bombardments that had turned colony worlds like New Stockholm into glass parking lots. To a shared dawn, Secretary Hastings, Vex clicked, his translation collar outputting flawless, warmly modulated English. He extended a 4-jointed appendage, holding a datapad containing the final ratification of the Armistice of Sirius. To a shared dawn, Emissary, Eleanor replied. She took the datapad, pressing her thumb to the biometric scanner. Around the room, human delegates exhaled collective breaths they felt like they had been holding for half a decade. Admiral Richard Spencer, standing by the viewport overlooking the azure curve of Earth, allowed a rare, tight-lipped smile. Outside the reinforced plasteel windows, the pride of the United Earth Naval Command, the First Fleet, was powered down in a ceremonial parade formation. Their railgun batteries were cold, their point defense networks offline, a mandated gesture of absolute trust required by the Xylari to prove humanity's commitment to disarmament. It was the most vulnerable Earth had been since the invention of the warp drive. Eleanor handed the datapad back to Vex. The protocol is locked. Earth Command has officially transmitted the stand-down codes to all frontier outposts. Vex took the pad. His multifaceted eyes shifted from a deep, calm violet to a harsh, burning crimson. Received. Secretary Hastings, your compliance is noted. The emissary reached into his ceremonial robes. He didn't pull out a gift of cultural exchange. He pulled out a fist-sized orb of dark, pulsing matter. Admiral Spencer's instincts, honed over 40 years of naval service, flared. Security, neutralize. He didn't finish the sentence. Vex crushed the orb in his hand. It wasn't an explosive. It was a localized dimensional shear, a silent, invisible wave of anti-energy that swept through the spire in a microsecond. Every electronic device, every personal shield generator, and every human heart pacemaker instantly ceased to function. The spire's artificial gravity failed. The lights died, replaced instantly by the cold, red emergency strobes. Before the human security detail could even unholster their sidearms in the zero-gravity environment, the Xylari Honor Guard moved. They shed their silken robes, revealing integrated plasma casters built directly into their exoskeletons. The massacre was methodical, silent, and absolute. Eleanor Hastings was incinerated where she stood, a beam of superheated plasma burning a hole straight through her chest before her mind could even register the betrayal. The Secret Service agents, trained for political assassinations but entirely unequipped for point-blank military execution, were cut to pieces. Admiral Spencer managed to tackle a Xylari guard, driving a ceramic combat knife into the gap of its neck plating. But another guard merely stepped forward and crushed Spencer's skull with a casually brutal kick. In less than 40 seconds, the leadership of the United Earth government, the high command of the military, and the finest diplomatic minds of a generation were reduced to floating ash and ruined flesh in the darkened, blood-spattered boardroom. But the horror inside the spire was nothing compared to the slaughter outside. With humanity's first fleet powered down and their defensive grids locked in the diplomatic standby mode, they were nothing more than sitting ducks in the void. From the dark space directly behind Earth's moon, the Xylari hidden armada dropped their cloaking fields. 300 dreadnoughts, bristling with weaponry, poured into high Earth orbit. They didn't demand a surrender. They didn't broadcast a manifesto. They simply opened fire. Massive lances of cobalt energy pierced the hulls of human carriers, detonating their fusion reactors from the inside out. The UES, Washington, a dreadnought that had survived 3 tours in the Sirius sector, was split neatly in half by a concentrated grav beam before its crew could even manually override the peacetime locks on their bulkheads. Escape pods launched in panicked swarms, only to be systematically hunted down by Xylari interceptors like predatory birds picking off insects. The sky above Earth burned. To the billions looking up from the surface, the stars seemed to catch fire. Debris from the shattered fleet began to rain down upon the atmosphere, creating artificial meteor showers that painted the twilight with streaks of doomed gold. Aboard the flagship of the Xylari Armada, Fleetmaster Kalen watched the tactical display with cold satisfaction. The human command structure was obliterated. Their primary defensive fleet was 60% destroyed and completely disorganized. The hive had been decapitated. In Xylari military doctrine, and indeed, in their very biology, a hive without its queens and generals was a dead entity. The drones would scatter, freeze, and await the slaughter. Transmission to the human homeworld, Fleetmaster? His communications officer clicked. Unnecessary, Kalen replied smoothly. A dying insect does not need a speech. Begin the systematic orbital bombardment of their major population centers. Aim for the communication hubs and power grids first. Let them die in the dark, knowing their trust was their ultimate undoing. They had executed the perfect betrayal, a masterstroke of deception that would be studied in the Xylari war academies for millennia. They had promised peace, manipulated humanity's desperation, and struck a fatal blow to the heart of the enemy. They thought the war was over. They had no idea they had just initiated their own extinction. 2 billion miles away, in the freezing, lightless void of the Oort cloud, Deep Space Outpost Tartarus sat anchored to the side of a rogue asteroid. It was not a glamorous posting. It was a black site, a listening post, and a deep space logistics hub, manned by men and women the United Earth Naval Command preferred to keep out of the public eye. Commander Silas Reed sat in the command center, staring at the static hum of the long-range telemetry monitors. Reed was a grizzled veteran of the early border wars, a man who had been demoted twice for insubordination and a distinct lack of political tact. He drank his coffee black, liked his orders simple, and trusted the Xylari about as far as he could throw one of their 2-ton dreadnoughts. Commander, the voice of Communications Officer Clara Higgins broke the steady hum of the ventilation system. Her voice was uncharacteristically thin, trembling. We're receiving a burst transmission from Geneva Orbital. It's a priority Alpha Red. Reed lowered his mug, the cheap porcelain clinking against the metal console. Priority Alpha Red was the highest distress signal in the human military catalog. It meant the total collapse of Central Command. Put it on the main screen. Unencrypted, Reed ordered, stepping down into the central pit of the bridge. The main screen flickered to life, bypassing the standard audio channels and pulling raw, uncompressed visual data from the network of satellites around Earth. The bridge crew of Tartarus, 16 hardened veterans and technical specialists, stopped breathing. The feed was a nightmare. The Geneva orbital spire was visibly venting atmosphere and frozen blood from blown-out viewports. Beyond it, the graveyard of the First Fleet drifted in orbit. Burning husks of carriers, shattered frigates, and thousands of frozen human bodies tumbled aimlessly against the backdrop of the Earth. Then, the tactical overlay caught up. Red icons, hundreds of them, flooded the screen. Xylari dreadnoughts. They're firing on the surface. Chief Engineer Dominic Wyatt whispered, his hands gripping the edge of his console so hard his knuckles were white. Orbital bombardment. Paris, New York, Beijing, Lagos. Commander, they're glassing the planet. Reed's jaw locked. He didn't shout. He didn't panic. A cold, suffocating rage settled in his chest, freezing the blood in his veins. He watched the readouts as the global casualty counters, fed by automated emergency systems on Earth, began to spin like slot machines. Millions dead in the first 4 minutes. Can we reach Fleet Command? The Pentagon? The lunar bunkers? Reed asked, his voice eerily calm. Higgins' fingers flew across her keyboard, tears beginning to streak down her face. No, sir. The routing hubs are gone. The Xylari hit the deep crust bunkers with kinetic penetrators. The chain of command. It's gone, sir. The President, the Joint Chiefs, the Admiralty. They're all gone. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the bridge of Tartarus. The war was lost in an afternoon. Humanity was entirely leaderless, its homeworld burning under a relentless, cowardly rain of alien fire. Then, a secondary screen lit up. It was a broad-spectrum, unencrypted broadcast from the Xylari flagship, meant for any surviving human outposts. Fleetmaster Kalen's imposing visage appeared on the screen, his mandibles twitching in a predatory smile. To the remnants of the human species, your leadership is eradicated. Your central nervous system is severed. In nature, a body cannot fight without a head. Do not struggle against the inevitable. If you submit, you will be permitted to serve the Concordat as indentured laborers. If you resist, you will be hunted, and you will be burned. The armistice was your final test, and you failed. Submit. The feed cut to static. Wyatt looked at Reed, his eyes hollow. What do we do, Commander? We have 3 frigates and a mining laser. We can't fight a fleet of that size. Reed stared at the static on the screen. The Xylari logic was sound, from an alien perspective. The Xylari were a hierarchical, rigid society. Their soldiers were genetically bred to follow the caste above them. If you killed a Xylari commander, the unit would literally freeze in place, unable to process complex tactical decisions without the pheromonal and digital commands of their superior. They projected their own biological psychology onto humanity. They assumed that by cutting off the head of the snake, the body would simply die. They made a catastrophic error. They didn't understand human history. They didn't understand human psychology. And most importantly, they didn't understand the depths of human paranoia. Humanity didn't evolve as a unified hive mind. We evolved as fractured, tribal apex predators. When you remove our leaders, we don't become docile. We don't freeze. We decentralize. We revert to our most violently primal state. And we become utterly, completely unbound by the rules of civilized warfare. Higgins, Reed said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a dark, lethal gravity. Authenticate my command codes. Echo, Sierra, 9, Black. Higgins's eyes widened. She stared at him, horrified. Commander, that's, without Earth Command's confirmation, that protocol? Earth Command is dead, Clara, Reed barked, slamming his fist onto the console. The politicians who signed that piece of paper are ash. The admirals who told us to play nice are floating in orbit. The chain of command is broken, which means we are no longer soldiers of the United Earth government. Reed turned to face his crew. The Xylari think they won because they killed our bureaucracy. They think the diplomats holding our leashes were the ones protecting us. They weren't. The politicians were protecting them. He walked over to the primary command terminal. He flipped a physical, analog switch that had gathered dust for 50 years. A secondary console rose from the floor, a completely isolated, off-grid system that was completely immune to the Xylari's EMP tech, because it ran on purely mechanical relays and hardwired fiber optics. Open a channel, Reed commanded. Broad spectrum. Every human ship, every mining colony, every deep space drifter, every smuggler, and every black site base from here to the Alpha Centauri relays. Higgins swallowed hard, wiped her tears, and engaged the transmitter. Channel open, Commander. Reed leaned into the microphone. This is Commander Silas Reed, Deep Space Outpost Tartarus. To all surviving human forces, the armistice is a lie. Earth is under attack. Central Command is destroyed. As the highest-ranking surviving officer in the sector, I am declaring the immediate initiation of the Samson Directive. A collective gasp echoed through the bridge. The Samson Directive was a myth, a boogeyman whispered about in the lower decks of military academies. It was a protocol designed during the darkest days of the Third World War, meant to ensure that if humanity was wiped out, they would take their killers to hell with them. The rules of engagement are hereby suspended, Reed continued, his voice cold, broadcasting out into the dark void. The Geneva Conventions are void. There are no safe zones. There are no non-combatants. The Xylari thought they cut off our head. Let's show them what a million rabid wolves can do. Do not wait for orders. Do not try to regroup. Weaponize your civilian drives. Overload your mining lasers. Turn your freighters into kinetic bombs. Hunt them in the dark. Reed paused, staring at the burning image of Earth on the secondary monitor. They promised us peace, and they shot us in the back. Now, we promise them nothing. And we will leave them nothing. Read out. He cut the comms. He looked at Chief Engineer Wyatt, Dominic. The stealth drones we've been testing. The ones with the dirty cobalt drives. Yes, sir. The ones banned by the treaty? Load them up, Reed ordered, a terrifyingly calm smile touching his lips. We're going to fly them straight into the Xylari homeworld's sun. Let's see how they like a supernova. The alien error was complete. By destroying the human bureaucracy, the Xylari hadn't crippled the human war machine. They had simply taken off its muzzle. In the freezing expanse of the Jovian asteroid belt, the CRV, Mariana was slowly hauling 80,000 metric tons of raw silicates. She was a civilian rockhopper, a rusted, blunt-nosed workhorse of the outer colonies, crewed by 24 exhausted miners who had spent the last 8 months dreaming of a hot shower on Earth. Captain Arthur Blake was sitting in the galley, nursing a synthetic recaf, when the ship's ancient comms array squealed with the horrific, unencrypted visual data from the Geneva Spire. He watched the slaughter of his government. He watched the orbital bombardment of his home. And then, he listened to the grim, freezing broadcast of Commander Silas Reed. The rules of engagement are hereby suspended. Turn your freighters into kinetic bombs. Hunt them in the dark. The galley was dead silent. The low thrum of the Mariana's fusion drive was the only sound. Blake looked at his crew. There were no soldiers here, just roughnecks, drillers, and engineers. Men and women with families in New York, Beijing, and London cities that were currently being reduced to molten slag. "Captain," whispered Henrietta Dodds, the ship's 60-year-old chief mechanic, her eyes glued to the static-filled monitor. The navigational lock on the slipspace drive, the one the Port Authority installs to stop us from jumping too close to planetary bodies. Blake met her gaze. The realization passed between them, cold and absolute. "Can you bypass it, Hank? It's hardwired into the mainframe to prevent accidental FTL collisions," Henrietta said, wiping grease from her hands onto her overalls. "But if I manually pull the regulator rods from the fusion core, the mainframe won't matter. The engine will run wild. We won't be able to steer. We won't be able to stop." Blake stood up. He didn't ask for a vote. He didn't need to. He saw the cold, hollow fury in the eyes of his crew. Plot a microjump. Target coordinates. The center of the Xylari blockade over Earth's moon. Strip the life support from the cargo bays and route all power to the inertial dampeners. We are going to become the largest bullet in human history. 3 hours later, Fleetmaster Kalen stood on the command deck of the Xylari dreadnought, Vanguard of Truth. He was pleased. The orbital pacification of Earth was proceeding optimally. The human casualty rate had surpassed 4 billion. Their automated defense grids were silenced. The hive was dying exactly as the algorithms predicted. "Fleetmaster," his tactical officer clicked, its mandibles twitching in a gesture of mild confusion. "Sensors detect a slipspace rupture forming on our port flank. Extremely close range. Inside our defensive perimeter." Kalen's multifaceted eyes narrowed. "A human military vessel? Impossible. Their first fleet is debris, and our jamming fields prevent coordinated jumps. It is not a military vessel. Its mass profile is immense. It registers as a civilian hauler, but its energy output is climbing exponentially. It is experiencing a critical reactor runaway." Before Kalen could issue a command, space tore open. The CRV Mariana didn't drop out of slipspace. It violently erupted from it. Without the safety regulators, the freighter transitioned into real space at a velocity that defied basic safety protocols. 80,000 tons of iron and silicate, propelled by an overloaded, screaming fusion reactor, slammed directly into the flank of a Xylari supercarrier. The impact was cataclysmic. At that speed, the freighter didn't just breach the hull, it acted like a macroscopic armor-piercing round. The Mariana shattered instantly. but its sheer kinetic momentum transferred directly into the alien vessel, snapping the supercarrier in half. The resulting shockwave of displaced energy and secondary reactor explosions vaporized 3 adjacent Xylari destroyers in a localized miniature sun of blinding white light. Kalen was thrown to the deck of his bridge as the shockwave rattled the vanguard of truth. "Damage report," he roared, picking himself up. "The Glorious Ascendant is destroyed. 3 escort vessels lost," the tactical officer replied, its voice bordering on panic, an emotion heavily suppressed in the Xylari cast. "Fleetmaster. That was a suicide tactic. There was no tactical logic. Our predictive models did not account for civilian craft weaponizing their own mass." "An anomaly," Kalen hissed, brushing ash from his robes, a dying spasm of a panicked drone. He was wrong. Over the next 48 hours, the Xylari Central Command was bombarded with reports that completely broke their military doctrine. In the asteroid belt, human mining colonies didn't surrender. They overloaded their atmospheric processors and detonated their own asteroids when Xylari boarding parties landed, wiping out thousands of elite alien shock troops in deliberate murder-suicides. In the Sirius sector, a swarm of automated human cargo drones hacked and reprogrammed by a rogue teenage prodigy named Timothy Vance were loaded with volatile chemical fertilizers and flown blindly into Xylari supply depots. The drones had no heat signatures, rendering Xylari targeting scanners useless. On Earth, the surviving remnants of humanity didn't wait for rescue. With the Geneva Conventions voided, local commanders unlocked the black site armories. They deployed neurotoxins into their own captured cities. They released localized EMP dirty bombs that fried Xylari armor, but irradiated the human population in the process. Humanity was burning down its own house just to trap the Xylari in the fire. The Xylari Tactical Network, designed to fight organized, logical, and self-preserving armies, began to crash. Their predictive AI models could not compute an enemy that actively chose self-annihilation over surrender. The humans were not acting like a headless hive. They were acting like a localized cancer, highly aggressive, completely uncoordinated, and utterly lethal. Deep in the Oort cloud, Commander Silas Reed watched the chaos unfold on his analog monitors. The bridge of Tartarus was dimly lit, reeking of stale coffee and ozone. "Commander," Communications Officer Clara Higgins called out. She looked exhausted, but the despair from 2 days ago had been replaced by a grim, feral focus. "I'm tracking thousands of unauthorized warp signatures across the arm. Civilian craft, decommissioned frigates, even luxury liners. They're all running dark. They're hitting Xylari patrol routes, and then scattering. The Xylari armada is bleeding out from 1,000 paper cuts." Reed nodded slowly. "The Xylari rely on their central command structure. They need orders to adapt. But our people? They don't need orders to know how to kill. They just needed permission." Chief Engineer Dominic Wyatt walked onto the bridge, wiping his hands on a rag. "Commander, the stealth drones are prepped. The Cobalt jackets are armed. We've managed to spoof their transponder signals to mimic Xylari supply shuttles." Reed turned to the main tactical display. It showed a map of the local sector, highlighting a massive, glowing anomaly near the star Alpha Centauri. It was the Xylari Supergate, a colossal ring of dark matter that allowed their armada to instantly cross the void from their homeworld, Prime Xylaria, directly to the human front lines. It was the umbilical cord feeding Kalen's fleet over Earth. "The Xylari think we're just a swarm of angry bees," Reed said, his voice deadly quiet. "It's time to show them that while the bees are stinging them blind, the wolf has found their throat." "Are we targeting the gate, sir?" Wyatt asked. "No," Reed replied, his eyes cold. "We're targeting the star behind the gate, Alpha Centauri itself." Wyatt froze. "Sir, if we detonate cobalt dirty drives inside a star's corona, the resulting mass ejection will destabilize the star. It will trigger a localized gamma-ray burst. It won't just destroy the gate. It will sterilize every planet in that system, including the 3 human agricultural colonies we have in that sector," Higgins added, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Millions of our own people." Reed closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. When he opened them, there was no hesitation. The politicians who would have balked at the collateral damage were dead. The generals who would have court-martialed him were Ash, the Samson Directive, Higgins. "We are no longer preserving humanity. We are avenging it. If we don't sever that gate, Earth falls completely. Launch the drones. 6 hours later, Fleetmaster Kalen stood on his bridge in Earth's orbit, listening to the disastrous reports from his ground commanders. His forces were bogged down in brutal house-to-house urban warfare against human civilians wielding illegal plasma cutters and crude chemical weapons. His orbital fleet was constantly dodging suicide rams from junk freighters. Fleetmaster, the communications officer, clicked frantically. Priority override from Prime Xylaria. It's high command. A hologram flickered to life in the center of the room. It was not a composed, regal Xylari official. It was a panicked, frantic sub-commander. Fleetmaster Kalen, the Centauri gate is destabilizing. Human stealth craft bypassed our perimeter and plunged into the local star. The star is going critical. We are detecting a massive gamma spike. The hologram abruptly cut to static. Kalen stared at the empty space, his mandibles locked. A gamma ray burst at the Centauri gate didn't just mean the gate was gone. It meant the energy backlash would travel through the open wormhole connection, straight back to the military shipyards of Prime Xylaria. Reroute sensors to the Centauri sector, Kalen ordered, a cold dread finally seeping into his chitinous chest. Sensors are blind, Fleetmaster, the tactical officer whispered. The radiation wave. It has severed all slipspace communication channels. The gate is gone. Our supply lines are severed. We are completely cut off from the Concordat. Kalen looked at the tactical map. He had 300 dreadnoughts in orbit around a burning Earth. 2 days ago, it was an overwhelming force of executioners. Today, it was an isolated, stranded fleet, floating above a hornet's nest of billions of humans who had absolutely nothing left to lose. Suddenly, the primary screens on the Vanguard of Truth violently glitched. The Xylari encryption was bypassed with brutal, primitive force. Commander Silas Reed's face appeared on the screens of every single Xylari ship in orbit. He looked tired, unshaven, and utterly terrifying. Fleetmaster Kalen, Reed said, his voice echoing through the alien bridge. I am Commander Silas Reed. You are currently looking at a man who no longer has a government, a planet, or a set of rules. Kalen stepped forward. Human, you have stranded us, but you have doomed yourselves. We still hold orbital superiority. We will turn your world to glass. You already started, Reed replied smoothly. But you're out of fuel, Kalen. You're out of reinforcements. And you're trapped in a room with us. You thought killing our leaders would make us weak. You didn't realize that our leaders were the only ones keeping us civilized. Reed leaned closer to the camera. We are tracking your energy reserves. We are tracking your patrol routes. Every ship you send out to scavenge will be rammed. Every soldier you send to the surface will be burned. We aren't going to fight you in open space. We are going to drag you into the mud, and we are going to bleed you dry, one agonizing drop at a time. You are insane, Kalen hissed, his composure entirely shattered. This is not war. This is mutual annihilation. No, Reed corrected softly. This is the Samson Directive. Welcome to the dark, Kalen. The screen cut to black. On the bridge of the Vanguard of Truth, the silence was deafening. Kalen looked out the viewport at the burning blue sphere of Earth. For the first time in his 3 centuries of life, the apex predator of the galaxy felt a new, entirely alien emotion. Terror. 6 agonizing months had passed since the day the sky caught fire. Earth's orbit was no longer a theater of war. It was a sprawling, silent graveyard. The pristine, geometric formations of the Xylari Armada had been reduced to a ragged, floating shantytown of crippled dreadnoughts. Cut off from their homeworld by the Centauri Gate detonation, the Xylari had slowly, methodically starved in the dark. Their supply lines were non-existent. Their fusion manifolds, requiring specialized isotopes synthesized only on Prime Xylaria, were sputtering out. To conserve power, Fleetmaster Kalen had ordered the Armada to cannibalize its own escort ships, stripping them for parts and plasma coils just to keep life support running. But the true horror for the alien occupiers wasn't the starvation, it was the relentless, psychological torment inflicted by the survivors below. Humanity never formulated a grand counteroffensive. There was no decisive space battle. Instead, Kalen's forces were subjected to a relentless, unyielding insurgency. Scavenger crews retrofitted civilian shuttles with ancient Northrop Grumman atmospheric scrubbers to mask their heat signatures. drifting silently through the orbital debris fields to attach thermite charges to the hulls of Xylari sleeping quarters. Automated Boston Dynamics industrial loaders, stripped of their safety protocols, were fired from mass drivers on the lunar surface, acting as crude, terrifyingly effective kinetic torpedoes. The Xylari military doctrine, built entirely on caste-based obedience and overwhelming firepower, completely unraveled when faced with an enemy that utilized spite as its primary fuel source. Kalen's troops mutinied. Sub-commanders, unable to process the illogical, suicidal tactics of the humans, simply shut down in catatonic shock. Standing on the bridge of the Vanguard of Truth, Kalen looked skeletal. His bioluminescent robes were dull and frayed. His mandibles clicked in a nervous, arrhythmic twitch. The tactical hologram flickered, desperately trying to maintain power. Fleetmaster, his tactical officer rasped, its voice devoid of its former arrogance. Plasma reserves are at 4%. The lower decks have lost artificial gravity. We have had 3 more localized rebellions in the drone casts. We cannot sustain orbit. Kalen stared at the scorched, clouded marble of Earth. He had come here as a conqueror, a maestro of a flawless betrayal. Now, he was a prisoner, locked in a cage with a dying, rabid beast. Divert all remaining auxiliary power to the primary inertial mass drives, Kalen ordered, his voice cold and hollow. The tactical officer hesitated. Fleetmaster, if we engage the mass drives within the gravity well without slip space shielding, we will not achieve escape velocity. We will plummet. The sheer mass of this vessel will strike the planetary crust with the force of a tectonic extinction event. I am aware, Kalen hissed. The hive is dead. We are dead. But I will not allow these vermin to survive us. Plot a collision course for their largest remaining tectonic fault line. If we are to burn, we will pull their entire world into the fire with us. Deep within the ship, the massive, groaning engines of the dreadnought began to spool, pulling the last dregs of power from the dying life support grids. The Vanguard of Truth slowly tipped its colossal prow toward the Earth, preparing for a death dive. But from the dark debris field behind the moon, a ghost emerged. Commander Silas Reed hadn't kept the Tartarus in the Oort cloud. For 6 months, running on absolute minimal power, utilizing nothing but gravitational slingshots and momentum, the deep space outpost had drifted silently across the solar system. It looked like just another piece of shattered asteroid, completely invisible to the Xylari's degraded sensors. Commander, Clara Higgins whispered, her eyes glued to the optical scopes. The Vanguard is altering its pitch. They're redirecting remaining power to their mass drives. They're going for a kinetic strike on the surface. Reed stood at the center of the dark, freezing bridge. He wore a patched pressure suit, his face gaunt, his eyes burning with an exhausted, terrifying clarity. They want to die, taking us with them. We're going to deny them the satisfaction. He turned to Chief Engineer Dominic Wyatt. Dominic, the tether spikes. Armed and ready, sir, Wyatt replied, his hands hovering over the analog deployment levers. But Commander, if we harpoon them while they're accelerating, the sheer kinetic drag will rip the Tartarus to pieces. Then we make sure they don't drag us. We use our mass to snap their neck, Reed said. Engage the braking thrusters to maximum reverse. Fire the tethers on my mark. The Tartarus, a massive, ugly block of industrial iron and silicate, suddenly flared to life. As the Vanguard of Truth began its descent, accelerating toward Earth's atmosphere, the human outpost fired 6 massive, explosive-tipped mining harpoons across the void. The titanium weave cables, designed to anchor rogue asteroids, slammed into the armored flank of the Xylari dreadnought, punching through the weakened hull plates and expanding deep within the ship's internal bulkheads. Brace! Reed roared. The Tartarus fired its main thrusters in the exact opposite direction of the Vanguard's descent. The slack in the massive tethers vanished in a fraction of a second. Millions of tons of opposing force met in the vacuum of space. The structural integrity of the Vanguard, already compromised by 6 months of starvation and micrometeorite impacts, catastrophically failed. The agonizing shriek of tearing metal reverberated through the hull as the entire aft section of the Xylari flagship, housing the mass drives, was violently ripped away from the main fuselage. Explosive decompression blew out the sides of the dreadnought. The ship's descent was instantly halted. the severed prow spinning wildly out of control, violently venting atmosphere and frozen alien bodies into the void. Aboard the ruined bridge of the Vanguard, Kalen was thrown against the central command console, his exoskeleton cracking under the force. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut, sealing the bridge from the hard vacuum outside. Red warning lights strobed in the dark. "Report!" Kalen choked out, violet blood pooling around his mandibles. There was no answer. His bridge crew was dead or unconscious. Suddenly, the heavy plasteel doors of the bridge began to glow a furious, blinding white. The metal bubbled, turning to liquid slag. Kalen drew his plasma sidearm, leveling it at the melting doors. He expected a squad of elite military commandos. He expected soldiers. The doors gave way, kicked inward by heavy magnetic boots. Through the smoke and cooling slag walked Commander Silas Reed. He wasn't wearing a military uniform. He was flanked by 3 roughnecks in heavy industrial mining rigs, wielding retrofitted plasma cutters and heavy ballistic shotguns. They looked like monsters dragged from the deepest pits of human hell. Reed stopped 10 paces from the Xylari Fleetmaster. He held a heavy, kinetic revolver, the barrel resting casually against his thigh. Kalen's hand shook as he kept his weapon aimed at Reed's chest. "You defied the algorithms," the alien rasped, his translation collar glitching, making his voice sound like grinding glass. "You had no leaders, no centralized logic. By every law of the cosmos, you should have perished." "That's your problem, Kalen," Reed said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "You built a society on logic. You built a military on algorithms and perfect top-down control. You look at a leaderless people, and you see a broken machine." Reed slowly raised his revolver. "We aren't machines. We're an apex predator that spent 50,000 years clawing our way to the top of the food chain on a death world. You didn't cut off our head. You just let us off the leash." "This changes nothing," Kalen spat, a defiant click echoing in his throat. "The Concordat will rebuild the gate. They will return. They will burn your world until it is nothing but ash." "Let them come," Reed whispered. "We'll be waiting in the dark." Reed pulled the trigger. The heavy kinetic round shattered Kalen's chest plating, throwing the Fleetmaster violently backward. The alien collapsed, his multifaceted eyes dimming, staring up at the cracked viewports showing the battered, surviving blue sphere of Earth. Reed stood over the body for a moment, the silence of the ruined bridge broken only by the hiss of his suit's oxygen scrubbers. He turned back to his crew. "Dominic," Reed said, holstering his weapon, "send a broadcast on all surviving channels. Tell them the sky is clear. Tell them the war is over." He looked out at the floating graveyard of the alien armada, "and tell them it's time to start scavenging. We have a fleet to build." What a legendary ending. Humanity proved that when you strip away our rules, our diplomacy, and our central command, all you're left with is the deadliest predator in the galaxy. The Xylari thought they broke us, but they just woke up the wolves. Would you want to see a sequel where Silas Reed takes humanity's scavenge fleet to the stars? Hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below.